Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we are back in the Fenix Simulations A320 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is a recently released highly detailed add-on, and what we're going to do today is look through some of those options in the EFB. So we have a whole list of airline modifiable options, and what we're going to do is take a look at what each of those means, when we might use it in real life, and what it actually does for us as pilots. I've been asked about this a lot, so it made sense I thought to do a video on it. And there's some quite interesting ones hidden in there, which just sort of prove the level of detail we have here with the Fenix. So we're going to take this A320 for a flight from Gatwick, and through various stages of flight, we're going to have a look at these different options. I'm a real-world Airbus pilot, but of course none of this is for any real-world use. It's just to give you some extra context on your home simulations. Right, let's get started. So first of all, what are these options? Well, they are here in the EFB. If you go to the Fenix app, then you have Sim Settings, Airline Modifiable Information. It's important to note that these will be set by your airline settings if you have used airline settings, or you can save a default. So this aircraft is set up to use airline, but I've already fiddled with these. So you may get different options each time you load in. So you need to go here and choose what you want or save them as you want them. So what we're going to do is start off by talking about the easiest one, brake fans. Brake fans on or off. Brake fans are added by airlines to enable us to cool down the brakes after what could be short runway landings. If we go to the wheel page down here, we can see the brake temperatures on the top row in degrees Celsius, currently 15 degrees, which is ambient. Typically after a taxi out, they would heat up a bit, sometimes up to 100, maybe 150 degrees. And after landing, of course, they can go well over 300, 400. Sometimes if you had a really heavy landing on a short runway, you could get over 500 degrees Celsius. Now, if there's any sort of breeze, and I mean over 5 knots of breeze, then in the real Airbus, these temperatures will gradually reduce quite rapidly. Even in a half an hour turnaround, you'll be okay. But there is a limit on the temperature we can have on these for takeoff. The temperatures must be below 300 degrees Celsius for takeoff. That's if you have no fans. If you have fans installed and you are using them, like this, brake fans on, then your temperature for takeoff needs to be 150 degrees as a maximum. The reason is the brake fans actually blow air onto the temperature sensor as well, so they give a slightly lower reading than the actual brake temperature. The reason for this temperature limitation is not so much that we need them to be cool for takeoff so we can stop. The brakes are actually more effective when they're warmed up to a point, but it's also to do with the fact that the brakes can't be in the wheel well if they're too hot, because if hydraulic fluid were to leak on them, it could cause a fire. So we need the brake temperatures to be at a reasonable temperature in the wheel well after takeoff when they retract. So with brake fans off, you get this image, you get nothing up here, and we have no button to press, and that's it. It's quite straightforward. If you have brake fans installed, you turn that on, you get brake fans button up here, nothing on the display, nothing on the wheel display, but you can turn it on and you should see the brake fan memo on the ECAM just telling us the brake fans are running. So when do we use these? Well, that will depend on the airline, but as I said, the limits are you want the temperatures below 300 degrees if they're off and below 150 if they're on. That is for takeoff. After landing, you'll turn them on once you have given it a few minutes after landing. You don't want to turn them on straight away. So mostly, if the brake temperatures are rising and rising and rising because you've had a heavy short landing, then you will turn them on sort of as you arrive on stand. You want to turn them on before you're parked so that the ground crew don't get too near to the brakes and get covered in carbon dust, because the brakes are carbon, and if you turn that on onto hot brakes, it actually blows some dust out. So you don't want to blow that dust on the ground crew. So we turn them on before we arrive on stand. If you've arrived on stand, then it's too late really, and you just leave them off. Like I say, the brakes will generally have no trouble cooling down. We'll also use them after a rejected takeoff, something like that, to keep the brake temperature under control. But the reason we wait after landing is that the brakes will actually heat up unevenly initially. So if you start blowing cold air on them, it can mess up the way they're designed to heat up and wear and so on. It's not very good for them. So we try and wait and let them evenly heat up, and then we can use the brake fans. But in an emergency, or if you think the brakes are getting too hot, then you'll turn them on as you need to make sure they don't go too hot. If you start getting temperatures above 600 degrees Celsius, then you're into problem territory, where you might find that you're getting closer to a risk of a tire deflating, something like that. Finally then, one other way, if you don't have brake fans in your airline, is that you can release the parking brake once the chocks are in. That's what a lot of airlines will do. That removes the brake calipers from the disc, and therefore you get airflow through, and they'll cool down quicker that way. So that's quite common in airlines that don't use brake fans. For takeoff, you can use them all the way up to lining up, and then you'll turn them off before you start rolling down the runway. This is to stop stones and other debris flying up and getting ingested into the fans. Just to show you on the outside then, this is now an aircraft with brake fans. And if we go into the wheel, I have shown this, but definitely worth showing again. You can see here in the middle section there is the mesh where the air is drawn in, certainly something you don't want to get close to. They're also very loud, so if you hear a high-pitched whine when you're boarding an aircraft, it could be because the brake fans are running. There they are, whizzing around. If we turn them off and remove them, we get this style of wheel. And that's it, that is the brake fan option. Next, let's discuss acceleration height, AGL. You can see here it says 1500 feet, so what's it talking about? Well, when we take off, if you see my takeoff tutorial videos, you'll know what I'm talking about, so I highly recommend you watch those. But on the performance page, we can see here thrust reduction and acceleration altitude is 1696. So in the Airbus, this altitude defaults to a setting that the airline chooses. This one is currently set to 1500 feet above the runway. The airfield here is 200 feet, so this is showing us about 1500 feet above the runway. Hence basically you can round that to 1700/1700. Now if there's specific noise abatement procedures, you'll actually use different numbers in here, but that's a whole other topic. But the default number here, 1500 feet, is quite normal. However, there are airlines that will use 1000 feet, for example, or maybe the airline will use 1000 here and 3000 here, or maybe 1500. Anyway, the point is acceleration is when the airplane will transition from SRS, which is the mode we'll see on takeoff, speed reference system, where we climb at takeoff thrust, and then or in fact not even takeoff thrust, we just climb at V2 plus 10 on two engines, and it will transition from that to en route climb and start accelerating the aircraft so you can clean up whilst obeying these restrictions. So this is currently 1500 feet. If we lower it to thousands, then the number in here drops automatically to 1000 feet. There you go, so that's about 1200 feet above QNH, which is 1000 feet above the ground. Because remember, it says AGL, above ground level. So this is a height, not an altitude. The number here is the altitude you're going to fly above sea level. Now in the real aircraft, of course, we could modify this. So if I did 1700, 3200, that would be a typical noise abatement A procedure, which is 1500 feet above the above the sea level. 1500 feet above ground, where we reduce the thrust, and 3000 feet above the ground where the aircraft accelerates. You can see that here it's only one option for both, so it will default both, but your options are 1000 or 1500, entirely up to you. If you've got big blue writing in here, it means you've entered it. You can just press clear to remove it and get back to the default. So entirely up to you which you prefer to have. Airlines, I wouldn't even like to guess which is more popular with the airlines. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take off from Gatwick. I've got a flight plan in here just to go from Gatwick to Gatwick, and we can take a look at a few of the other items. So let's get going. 50% on the N1s, half side stick forward. Engines are stabilised. 2 clicks forward now. Man flex 68 SRS runway, order thrust is blue and armed. Lovely day here in Gatwick. $80 to 100 knots, releasing the side stick to 0. And rotate. Positive climb, gear up. Nav. And now we'll see as we get up to our about 1200 feet acceleration, we'll see it transition from the current, I'll just put the autopilot in, it will go from SRS into climb. So we're going to happen slightly earlier than in my usual streams and videos where I typically leave it at 1500 feet. There it is, 1200 feet. Saying lever climb, thrust levers, back to climb, nose will lower. It's obeying the constraints in magenta, all looking good. Above the green F, flaps to 1. Okay, above the green S, flaps to 0. Ground spoilers disarmed, nose lights off. Let's look at some more of these options. So here we go, it's now a much colder day. Temperature outside we need to look at these numbers. Static air temperature -6, that is the actual ambient temperature if we were to stand still outside the aeroplane. TAT is total air temperature, is +3. As we fly through the air hits the front of the airplane and compresses. This heats it up. If you squeeze air, it heats up. So that gives you that higher temperature, +3. If this number is 10 degrees, +10 or below, and you're in visible moisture, as we are now, you need to turn on the engine anti-ice. So you turn it on. This is a preventative measure, and we do it to make sure ice doesn't build up and affect the airflow into the engine. So I'll say that again. Total air temperature of +10 or below and visible moisture, i.e. you're flying through clouds, it's raining, something like that. This applies on the ground all the way up in the climb until the static air temperature is below -40. When the static air temperature, i.e. the ambient temperature outside the airplane, is below -40, we consider it too cold for the ice to form on the airplane because in theory the moisture is frozen already, so it won't stick to the airplane, it will just bounce off, so we don't need to run the engine anti-ice. However, that does not apply in the descent, so it is a bit confusing. So in the cruise, if it's below SAT of -40, we can leave the engine anti-ice off even in cloud. But as soon as we start descending, even if the temperature is below -40, we have to put the engine anti-ice on, i.e. at low power settings. So hopefully that makes sense. So in these conditions, we're outside of the clouds now, so now I can turn the engine anti-ice off. But if it starts raining on the windshield or we re-enter one of these clouds, then it'll be anti-ice back on. Great, so that's a very brief summary of the anti-ice. So what is this ice detection message? Well, that is a sensor that'll be on the nose of the aeroplane. By the way, fitted. I haven't actually seen one for a long time, but I think there's one fitted around the nose. And the engine nacelle is here, and I'm not sure if it has it fitted to the engine as well. But this is what's heated on the engines, the nacelle here. By the way, the wings are surprisingly unheated. The only part that's heated on the A320 is the outboard 3 slats. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. The tail is not heated at all. The inboard slats are not heated at all. It's quite remarkable. But modern jetliners like this do not pick up ice as much as you would expect. Certainly not as much as some of the slower propeller aircraft. So we would have to, if we see that there's ice on the airframe, we'd have to turn on the wing ice. To see if there's ice on the airframe when we don't have that sensor, I can look at this little stick here. And what this stick does is it sits in the airflow like the wings and tail, and ice will build up on the leading edge. So if I look at this and see ice, then I would need to simply turn on the wing anti-ice. So the engine anti-ice goes on to prevent ice forming, the wing anti-ice goes on to remove ice. You can leave it on though once it's on and just let it keep breaking off the ice whilst it's there. What that does is it pumps hot bleed air into those outboard slats, and you can actually see it from the flight deck on these outer ones on the airplanes where you can see the wings. You see the ice along the leading edge breaking off, because that's where ice forms. It'll be along the leading edge when we're flying through the air like this. So that is the purpose of the anti-ice panel. However, if you pay for the option, you can have an ice detection probe. That way the airplane will actually tell you when you have ice. It will appear down on the ECAM, something that a luxury we don't get if we just have to look at this spigot here. By the way, you might be wondering, well, how on earth do you know if it's if you've got ice at night? Yeah, it's not easy. I'll show you how. Let's take it pretty dark, and there is actually a light up here, ice indicator and standby compass. So I've dropped the standby compass down, you can't really read it. You turn that on, you get a little light in there, and you can see it just lights up inside. It's not a very effective system, I can tell you that. However, you can get an idea just using that. So that is the normal way. But with this option, we'll get a message down here if we encounter ice. And here we go, with a bit more ice, we get wing anti-ice on, engine mode select ignition. So what it wants now is the wing anti-ice on and the mode selected to ignition. But as I said, we would do this ourselves anyway if we thought we were in those sorts of conditions. But yeah, we can look for it. But that is the extra thing we get with that ice detector. Just another backup over what we can see. But it's not modeled visually at the moment. So in summary, for the ice detector message then, ice detection over here, what's going to happen is if the aircraft detects ice, it will actually give us the warning if we have these anti-ice off. We would still, as far as I'm aware, and I don't know the procedures for using this system, but this is what it does. But as far as I'm aware, it's the same. You're going to run the engine anti-ice preventatively, just like we would. And then if you see ice build up on the airframe, you're going to turn on the wing ice. But if you forget to do that, or you get distracted by some other problem, the ones with an ice detector are going to give you the ECAM warning as an extra backup. So if you forget to have them on, like this, there we go, we're in severe icing conditions, and there we go, we get ice detector message, and it demands that we turn them on. So that's what the little ice detection option is. If we turn it off, we won't get that ECAM. It may be latched in there now. There we go, with it off. All the systems are off, and the airplane will fly along, and it won't tell us anything. We need to work it out ourselves. Pilots are very used to this though. It's sort of a second nature thing, although we obviously don't do anything second nature. We do consciously decide, but it's one of those things that we're always looking for, the engine anti-ice. It's just a big part of aviation, is making sure you avoid getting ice on the airframe in the wrong places at the wrong time. Okay, we are back on a nice day now, just flying along quite happily at 6,000 feet, and then we're going to move on to the next option. So we've done brake fans, ice detection and acceleration. Next, let's look at AC Essential Auto Switching. Now this is to do with a failure in the aircraft. So I have done this on stream, but I'm going to do a brief summary now of what it's telling us. If we go to the electrical page, and it's an electrical system we're referring to here, we can see lots and lots of information. So the Airbus is primarily AC, alternating current, electricity powered. So we've got generator 1, generator 2. These are AC generators from the engines. They supply what are called bus bars. Bus bars are like those sockets. You know, you've got extension cables that have several sockets on the, so you plug one into your outlet and then you can plug in several things. This was what bus bars in a very simplified way mean. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an electrician, as you probably tell by that. So from these bus bars we can connect systems. So different aircraft systems are connected to different bus bars. The idea is if one fails, then we don't put two important systems on the same one, we split them up. So we'll have one autopilot on one bus bar, one autopilot on another bus bar, and so on, to make sure that as many things are available if there's a failure of one, because a whole bus bar could fail. Now a very important bus bar is the AC Essential. This ESS means essential, and we've got DC, direct current essential. In the emergency electrical configuration, which is an emergency situation where we lose all electrical generation on the aeroplane, what will happen is you'll end up relying on the DC Essential, the AC Essential and the DC battery bus bars, just these bus bars here, and they'll be powered by the ram air turbine and so on. So these are very important. On the AC Essential bus bar, things like the captain's PFD are fed. So if you lose the AC Essential bus, you lose quite a lot of important systems. So it's one of the more important ones. On original Airbuses and older aircraft, it's fed by AC bus bar 1. If AC bus bar 1 fails, it can be fed by AC bus bar 2 instead. So the power is just sent from the bus bar to the next bus bar. But it will not automatically swap over on the original aeroplanes. Later ones have been modified so that if AC bus bar 1 were to fail, the essential bus bar will be fed directly from 2 without having to do anything. But on the older aircraft, there's this button here, AC Essential Feed, and you can see here it's the same diagram, so AC bus 1, green arrow to AC Essential bus. Originally this would not happen automatically. We'd have to press this button to swap it over. The problem is pressing that button is something you would do as part of your ECAM, and it would take a while to get there. You need to fly the airplane safely first. You can't just go pressing buttons. So it's much better that it does it automatically for us, which is typical for it to do now. So how can I demonstrate this? So let's fail AC bus bar 1. I'm going to go to config, manual failures. It's an electrical failure, and let's find I want to fail AC bus 1. So first of all, let's make sure we have AC Essential Auto Switching off, so it will not automatically switch over. So let's fail AC bus bar 1, which will mean we lose the AC Essential bus. There we go, clunk, and look how much we lose. It's almost as bad as the emergency electrical configuration. It's really quite nasty. This is because these systems are fed by the essential bus bar because they're so important. So we've lost captain's FMGC, we've lost captain's PFD, ND, the top engine display. So co-pilot's going to have to take over and fly here. So you can see that flying the aircraft like this, although perfectly possible, let's just get the engine set, you'd have to do a full FNC, and I've talked about this in other videos. I'll talk about it again in the future. But anyway, it's perfectly acceptable to fly the airplane like this, but it's not ideal to have to spend a period of time like this while you stabilize, and then you can go into your abnormal and diagnosis and so on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is clear out that failure. All you have to do is go back to your failures and then reselect it, and it will clear out. It stops being amber. We'll leave that back on flight plan, and hopefully these things will all come back to life. Remember, it is simulated properly. We're getting loads and loads and loads of warning. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have AC Essential Auto Switching turned on, and I'm going to show you the exact same failure. We're not talking about the management of the failure later, because with that failure we just saw, you would get these screens back. You just need to have pressed this button up here. But what I'm going to do now is show you how easily that happens when it's done automatically for you. As ever, I always like things that are done automatically. So let's go to manual failures, elec, AC bus 1. There it is. And what have we lost? So there's some warnings. We get the ECAM, AC bus 1 fault. It's concerned about the generator because the generator's not feeding it properly. But as you can see here, AC Essential bus bar now being fed from AC2. It's doing this automatically, and look at the state of the airplane. We didn't even drop out of normal law. It has kept itself in really, really good shape. If we look on the overhead panel, you can actually see that the AC Essential feed says alternate. It's automatically gone to alternate, whereas before we would have had to press it. So that's what the AC Essential feed is there for. It's a failure redundancy thing that makes life a lot easier, and it is very common for Airbuses these days to have that option modified and to have it up and running. So let's clear that fault. So finally then, I've got AC Essential Auto Switching turned off. I'm going to fail it again, and we get the... There you go, that's what you'd get. So you get it looking like this. This is what would happen if you didn't have the automatic system. You see, remember we lost everything. We've gone into alternate law, autopilot's failed and all sorts. And if I now go to the overhead panel and turn on the essential feed to alternate, then it will all come back. But not as good as having it do it automatically. Next up is the Auto TCAS. Auto TCAS is a very modern thing. This is something that the Neos were first to have, and now it's being introduced to the older Airbuses. So this is something I've talked about in a video. So if you search 320 SimPilot TCAS, I have a video in the A320X from Fly-by-Wire where I show you the automatic TCAS activating. Essentially it means the aircraft will fly a TCAS for you. So I discuss what TCAS means and how we use it and how we can see the aircraft fly it for us. So I highly recommend watching that video. That is going to be the way forward there, because it's quite a big topic and I certainly can't fit it into this video. But Auto TCAS means that essentially the airplane would fly the full TCAS maneuver, which is when you avoid traffic that has become too close to the airplane, and it can actually fly it itself and then return to your original level. Traditionally on older Airbuses we would do all of the flying ourselves for a TCAS maneuver. But with the Auto TCAS option, the aircraft can do it. It's a very nice system. Great. Next, let's talk about LDEV. LDEV is simply lateral deviation. That's what it stands for. What it means is if we're flying a non-precision approach, it will bring up a lateral deviation scale along the bottom of the PFD. So flying non-precision approaches is something I haven't yet shown on the channel properly, but what we're going to do is fly this RNAV via a levy. So as we see in the flight plan, I need to be at a levy at 3,000. It says about 3,500 feet, but the restriction there is to be above 3,000 feet. So I'm going to put 3,000 feet in the window and start my descent down. Thrust idle open descent. Okay, so if we now activate the approach phase by perf, activate approach, confirm, you see here we have VDEV on the vertical scale, and we have LDEV on the lateral scale. So it's just another indication of our lateral deviation. It makes it look a bit more precise. Do not be fooled, this is not an RNS and it's not as precise as that, and it's not as easy to use. We are still using the final app mode. Now I have videos on using final app on the channel. I will do more videos in the future. Let me just turn off some of that anti-ice, we don't need it now. But there are some issues with using final app to fly a non-precision approach. It doesn't work like an RNS. We can't intercept it from sort of halfway. We can't intercept it from above, and it doesn't draw out very well, or it's quite unpredictable. Non-precision approaches are a big topic in aviation. They are where most reported incidents happen. It's not to say they're unsafe, but they are a focus for pilots. They need more briefing, more careful planning, and there are less backups compared to a precision approach. An RNS is called a precision approach because it also provides vertical guidance. Although this says VDEV, that's not vertical guidance. That's not based on anything except the calculations that the Airbus has in its head about where it wants to be. So that's what the LDEV scale is. It simply draws this here, and as we turn around the corner it will stay there, looking a little bit like a localizer. But that is not what I want to show you now. So that's all LDEV is. It's not that exciting. But if we go to this FLS option, this stands for Flight Management System Landing. Sorry, Flight Management System FMS Landing System. So I'm going to turn that on, and now if we look, the whole system, everything has changed. If we press LS, we get this. Let's turn it on. So now we're flying the FMS landing system. It's still the same non-precision RNAV to 26 left. But, and again, I have a video on this on the channel already, but it's not something I've used in real life. So this is very much me reading a few things online and trying to pick up the pieces and tell you how I would interpret it from what I've seen in the real world. So speed out star, there we go. So FLS appears on the PFD to remind us we're doing an FLS approach. It is still the RNAV for runway 26 left, Do not mistake it. It is not an approach type, it is simply a guidance type. It is just a different way of displaying the same thing on the PFD. This is very similar to Final App, but it has a key advantage, which is it extends out and behaves more like an ILS. So we now, instead of having to go to specific waypoints and make sure we're below the glide slope and then arming Final App and capturing it and so on, we can actually intercept it a bit like an ILS. We have these double magenta diamonds to show us that. It also says FAP, FMS approach, up here on the PFD. There's still no category. It is not a Cat 3. You can't auto land or anything like that. So I'm going to get a bit closer and show you how that works. We can see it's drawn out this center line. We can do this for using Final App mode as well, but yeah, it's just a drawing. What is effectively happening here is the Airbus is taking the non-precision approach and it's drawing it out like an ILS and then displaying it to us as pilots like an ILS. This just keeps it a bit more standard and a bit more like we would expect for the airplane, and it reduces the risk of us messing up the Final App mode, and there are a few ways you can do that, which is a whole topic on its own. But there's things such as the aircraft descending too quickly early, things like that can be caused by incorrect sequencing and so on, and some of those risks are mitigated with this system. This is more typical on the newer bigger Airbuses, but it is now fitted, if you want it, onto your smaller A320s. However, as I say, I have not used this, and I don't actually know many people who have. It's one of those things that is not required. It doesn't increase your minima or your certification at the moment, so it's a nice feature, but airlines don't tend to pay for nice features. They pay for features that increase operational robustness. So if this allowed you to fly an approach when other people couldn't, then maybe they would pay for it, or if it was proven to definitely increase safety, maybe they will in the future. But for now, it is quite a rare thing to see. So what we're going to do then is I'm just heading out to intercept, and unlike a Final App, we're not going to see nav out, final blue and all of that stuff. We're going to see F lock star, or F lock, sorry, and F glide slope armed. So it's like a localizer and a glide slope, but it's not. It says F, it's FMS, because it's basically an FMS calculation of a localizer and a glide slope. So just like an ILS, let's turn towards it. Runway 26, so I'll go for 290 degrees, a 30-degree cut. It's pretty normal. And now let's imagine we're cleared for the ILS. Our levy is in front of me. I'm going to press approach, and there it is. F glide slope, F lock. And now it's going to behave like an ILS. F lock star, just like we wanted. As we get closer, and you can see here the DME, but it's not a DME. This is just a calculated distance to the runway. We're 12 miles away, so at around 9 miles, because this is a 3-degree final approach, which I can see in flight plan. There it is, 3 degrees. At about 9 miles, it's going to move. So here comes the diamond for the glide slope, moving down. Let's go to flap 1. So again, a rare feature, nonetheless a cool one to be modelled. In Final App, you can configure whilst descending along the procedure, although you'd want to start down at least flap 1, maybe even flap 2. But this is just like an ILS in terms of the configuring and the distances in that sense. So there's F glide slope star. Let's go to flap 2. And down we go. Now, you can't engage the second order pilot. It will just swap over, unlike an ILS, because remember, there's no auto land capable here. There's no category shown here. Good. So I'm going to let the airplane fly the approach. I'm going to configure fully now, and we'll talk about the last options. Gear down. So nav in the go around is a feature. This is quite common on aircraft these days. If you're going to fly an approach such as an RNP-AR or an approach with RF legs, nav in the go around is probably required. It is a thing that can be modified. A lot of old Airbuses are modified to include it now, so it is quite normal to have even on your older Airbuses. What does it mean? Well, in the Airbus, we have a go-around procedure. I've got videos on the go-arounds, so do look those up on the channel. But and I will, of course, show them again in the Fenix at some point soon. But what it's going to be talking about is when we go around in the Airbus, we move the thrust levers to toga, all the way forward, and we'll see a set of FMA changes. It will say man toga, it will say SRS, assuming you're below acceleration, and it's going to say the go-around track. So the lateral mode will be go around track, which just means it's going to carry on straight ahead. It's going to carry on the track you're currently on. We don't want that. We want to follow the blue line, because the airplane helpfully has the go around coded in here, 2,000 feet, and it's a left turn onto 178. So that's what we want to do. That's the procedure here at Gatwick. So why wouldn't I want to fly that? So what we usually have to do is we have to push the heading bug to re-engage nav mode, and then it will fly that turn. If you have nav in the go around selected, let's turn it on. That will be incredibly useful because it's very distracting to have the aeroplane go into go around track and then you need to press it, because lots is going to be going on. We're going to be moving flaps, raising gear, checking the FMAs, and what we don't want to do is have to have a risk of us missing the go around track and the aeroplane accidentally flies straight on. The reason it's required for RNPAR and RF legs is because that's probably whilst you're avoiding terrain and you don't want the aeroplane to miss its chance.
1,000.
So there we go. So let's imagine we're going to go around to 3,000 feet now. I've got nav in the go around. I'm going to turn it off actually to illustrate my point. So remember, we need to go ahead, and then when we get to 2,000 feet, make our left turn south. So let's go around. So we say go around flaps, thrust levers all the way through to toga. Get man toga SOS go around track. PM will move the flaps in a stage, so flaps to 3. Then we're going to see then we read out our FMAs. Then we get positive climb, gear coming up. But what you can see is it's gone to go around track. This is the wrong mode. So the airplane is just going to carry on this track forever, and I need to push nav. And there we go. Now it goes into nav, and it will fly the go around procedure as prescribed in the box. We're above acceleration, saying lever climb, 2 clicks back, flaps from 3 to 1. All pretty normal stuff. Now that's not the exact correct way to do a go around. We'll talk about that later. But as you can see, it went to go around track and wanted to carry straight on. If we had nav in the go around enabled, all it would have done is instead of saying go around track there, it would have gone straight into nav on its own. Much better. Okay, so we're coming in for a landing now, and I'm going to show you the final modifiable option, airline information. Yellow hydraulic steering. What this means is we obviously have 3 hydraulic systems on the Airbus. We've got green, blue and yellow. On older aircraft, the green system powers the nose wheel steering. On newer aircraft, the yellow system powers the nose wheel steering. Crucially, there are some implications of this if you have a hydraulic failure, obviously, or an engine failure. So in the older aircraft, if you lost the green hydraulic system, you'd also lose nose wheel steering. In the newer aircraft, if you lost the yellow system, you'll lose nose wheel steering. So if you're simulating a newer aeroplane with the yellow hydraulic system, yellow hydraulic steering on, this is a newer aeroplane. The Neos are like this, and a lot of the more modern Airbuses. It's not a super modern thing. It's been around for a while now. I don't think it's something that airlines can modify either. I don't think you can change it after the effect. I think it's just how the aeroplane comes. Not sure on that though. Anyway, the result is, if we were to have an engine failure, let's say we were landing and we wanted to land and taxi with a specific engine, then it might mean we may or may not have the nose wheel steering available. So that's the implication there. So I've currently got it on the yellow system. So let's land, and I'll just show you one of the small implications of that.
Light slow. Light slow. 40, 30, 20, retard. 5.
Okay, so let's come to a stop on the runway here, and let me show you just a typical time that this actually matters, this steering being on a different system. So forward idle. Right, what if we had an engine failure on final approach? Those of you who are familiar with the Airbus and have seen my streams will know that when we taxi on one engine only, we taxi using engine number one, and we turn off engine number 2, and then we run the yellow hydraulic pump to power the yellow hydraulic system. So that works really well, of course, and the implication would be that if we were to have lost engine number 2 in flight and it was shut down, then we could simply taxi in on engine number 1, and we can use a yellow pump to provide the nose wheel steering. Makes sense. But what if engine number 1 is failed and we've only got engine number 2? Can we then taxi in? Well, if you're in an airplane with nose wheel steering on the yellow hydraulic system and you've only got engine number 2, then of course you can, because the nose wheel steering will still work on the yellow system. However, if you're in an airplane with the green hydraulic steering, let's put it on the green. This is getting a little bit complex now, but bear with me. So on the older aircraft with the green hydraulic steering, so that is powered by this system. Let's imagine that engine number 1 is the engine that failed. So I'm going to turn it off. So we've only got engine number 2. Now, in a newer aeroplane, we would simply have nose wheel steering available to us because the yellow system would be powering it. But now, look at this. I've stopped. I've got the parking brake set on the runway after our landing. It's been a bit of an issue because of an engine failure. And if I go to the status page, we'll see lots and lots of failures. Let's let the hydraulic system spool down. There we go. So green system's lost pressure. And if we look here, nose wheel steering. You can see the G. It's supplied by the green system and it's not working. Oh dear. So how do we power the green system? Well, I can't power it through a pump because there's no yellow pump. So you might be wondering, well, why isn't it being powered by the PTU, the power transfer unit? That only runs when the brake is off. With the parking brake on, it's inhibited. So at the moment, it looks like we can't steer. If we look at the status page and we're trying to decide what to do, we might go, oh no, we can't taxi because the nose wheel steering is broken. Well, no problem. If I release the parking brake, there we go. The PTU runs. The green system now is supplied with pressure. And if we go to the status page, a load of those warnings disappear. They were just related to the fact that PTU was inhibited whilst the parking brake was on. So that is an implication that we sometimes see in the aircraft when doing simulator checks and flying around on one engine and so on. So there you go. So that is an issue. If you've got the yellow hydraulic system enabled, a more modern option, then none of that would matter. Even with the parking brake set like that, I can go to the status page. In fact, you can see here, all working fine. And there's no nose wheel steering warning because, of course, it is supplied by the yellow system, which is running from engine 2. Likewise, you could reverse this situation, of course, and let's imagine engine 1 was running but engine 2 had failed. However, in all circumstances there, either you use the PTU or we can use the yellow electric pump to supply it. Just keep in mind that none of this is applicable if you've lost pressure to the system that supplies your nose wheel steering. Sorry, lost fluid in the system that supplies your nose wheel steering. So in either case, you need fluid to still be in that system. It's just about if you lose the ability to pressurize it through your normal method. So that's all for today's video. I hope it's been interesting for you. Thank you very much for watching. Just a few little tidbits about some of those airline modifiable options. They're quite in depth. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that makes all this happen. So yeah, great fun that we get to see these in the simulator. There'll be plenty of live streams and more guides coming with the Fenix A320 and of course other airliners in the live stream. So do please subscribe if you'd like to see those. We'll see you again in another video or live stream soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.